They thought I would never learn the truth. But when I opened that envelope hidden in my late wife's desk, I discovered forged documents, a false identity, and a son I never knew existed. And the ones who forged my name had no idea I'd use their lies to destroy them. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. My name is Clarence. 77 years old. It is not a name you hear often anymore, but back when Truman was president, every other boy in my town seemed to be a Clarence. We wore crew cuts, carried marbles in our pockets, and thought the future was wide open. I spent that future working numbers. 35 years as a bank auditor, contracts, signatures, ledgers, the quiet art of knowing when a decimal or a pen stroke meant fraud. It was not glamorous work, but it kept a roof over our heads and paid for college tuitions. And it taught me something that my children never understood: the truth always leaves a paper trail. When my wife, Margaret, passed, the silence in the house grew sharp. I thought my children would fill it with visits, laughter, maybe even help with the garden she loved. Instead, they came circling like vultures. At first, it was phone calls, condolences that slipped too quickly into questions. "Dad, what are you planning to do with the house?" My eldest son, Philip, asked not 3 days after the funeral. His voice was carefully polite, but I could hear the hunger under it. A week later, my daughter Ellen chimed in, "The land out by the creek is too much for you now. It's time to think practically. Taxes, upkeep, it's not realistic. Practical." That was the word they used when they wanted something for themselves. Then came the suggestions. Downsizing. Assisted living. Selling assets. Each one phrased like they were doing me a kindness, when really, they were calculating their inheritance like accountants in a dim office. One evening, my daughter-in-law, Sharon, arrived unannounced. She had a neat little folder tucked under her arm, her smile too bright, her tone syrupy. "Dad, you shouldn't worry about bills and legal nonsense at your age. Just sign here." She slid the papers across the kitchen table like a waitress laying down a menu. The sheets were clipped together, the top one already marked with a sticky note that said "Sign here." I picked them up slowly. My hands may have been lined with age, but my eyes hadn't lost their sharpness. A bank auditor never forgets what bad ink smells like. And these pages reeked of it. The deeds for my land were inside. Pages I had never signed, yet there was my name at the bottom of each one, perfectly curved, perfectly forged. My breath went cold, and for a moment, all I could hear was the tick of the kitchen clock. Sharon leaned forward, still smiling. "It'll just make things easier for us to manage on your behalf, Dad. Less stress for you. Don't you trust us?" Trust. The word was a knife. I laid the papers back down without a word. 35 years in banking had trained me for moments like this, where silence unsettles the guilty more than any outburst. Sharon shifted in her chair, her smile tightening. "It's just a formality." But I knew better. My own children, or at least the people they had married, had already crossed the line. They hadn't just circled my estate, they had stepped inside, pen in hand, ready to carve me out of it. Sharon shifted in her chair when I did not reach for the pen. The silence in the kitchen thickened, broken only by the tick of the old clock on the wall and the faint hum of the refrigerator. "Dad," she said finally, the brightness of her voice cracking around the edges, "I know legal documents can be confusing. That's why we took the time to prepare everything. It's all in your best interest. I kept my eyes on her, steady. I spent 35 years auditing contracts, Sharon. I know the difference between fresh ink and old signatures. Her lips twitched. What are you saying? I pushed the folder back across the table, slowly, as if sliding a poisonous snake back into its cage. I'm saying these signatures look more like practice strokes than my own hand. Someone's been tracing me. Her smile faltered. That's ridiculous. Philip just wanted to save you the trouble. We had a notary. Don't lie to me, I interrupted, sharper than I intended. The chair creaked as I leaned forward, resting both palms on the table. I may be 77, but my mind is not for sale. And my name sure as hell isn't for forging. For a moment, her mask cracked. The syrupy tone vanished, replaced by something colder. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, like a curtain pulling back. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she said flatly. I sat back, folding my arms. Good. Harder means I'm paying attention. The color rose in her cheeks. She gathered the papers with jerky movements, snapping the clip shut. Philip thought you'd be reasonable. We're just trying to help. Help yourselves, you mean? She froze halfway to her purse, her fingers tightening on the folder. I let the words hang in the air, heavy and deliberate. Tell my son, I said finally, my voice low, calm, that if he wants to discuss my property, he can come to me like a man. Not through his wife, and certainly not through forged documents. For the first time, Sharon looked unsettled. Her eyes darted to the door as if she could not leave fast enough. Fine, she snapped, stuffing the folder into her bag. But you're going to regret making this so difficult. Her heels clicked across the linoleum, each step sharper than the last. The front door shut with a slam that rattled the picture frames in the hallway. I sat alone at the table, the clock ticking, my pulse still steady. They thought I was blind, too old to notice ink that wasn't mine. They thought the grief had dulled me, that I would sign anything if it came with a smile and a, we're just helping, Dad. But they had forgotten who I was. And I had not even begun to dig. Philip showed up 2 nights later, unannounced, the way his mother used to when she wanted to check if I'd taken my medicine. But this wasn't concern. I could tell from the way his headlights sat idling in my driveway for a long minute before he cut the engine. He entered without knocking, like the house was already his. I was sitting in Margaret's chair in the living room, the old lamp throwing a tired glow across the carpet. He didn't bother with greetings. Dad, he started, voice tight, Sharon told me you refused to sign the transfer documents. I didn't refuse, I said evenly. I caught your wife handing me forgeries. The word landed like a hammer. His jaw tightened, and his hand flexed at his side. They weren't forgeries, he snapped. They were drafts. We had to prepare them so everything would be ready when you signed. That's how it works. I leaned forward, my voice low. I know how it works, Philip. I wrote the book on catching people who cut corners with ink. And if you're going to steal from me, at least have the decency not to insult my intelligence while you're at it. He shifted, pacing, his polished shoes clicking against the wood floor. You're being paranoid. You're 77, Dad. You can't manage all this land, the house, the accounts. We're just trying to take the burden off your hands. By forging my name. He stopped pacing, and for a second, his mask cracked. The sharpness in his eyes was unmistakable, the hunger, the calculation. You think this is about you, he said quietly, almost a hiss. This is about keeping things in the family. About protecting what's ours before the government, or worse, outsiders, come sniffing around. We can't wait for you to decline. Decline. The word tasted like acid in the air. You sound like a man rehearsing excuses, I said. Not reasons. The silence stretched, heavy, until he gave a sharp laugh. You always were stubborn. Fine. Don't sign. But don't come crying to me when the state decides you're incompetent, and a judge decides where all this goes. He grabbed his coat from the banister, storming toward the door. His voice floated back, harsher than the slam that followed, Don't make me the enemy here, Dad. You're the one forcing my hand. The house settled into silence again, but it was a different kind now, thick, almost vibrating with the aftershock of what had just been said. I sat there a long while, staring at the empty hallway. My own son, standing in my house, threatening me with incompetence and courtrooms. They weren't circling anymore, they were moving in for the kill. And then, for reasons I couldn't quite explain, my feet carried me to Margaret's study. Her desk still smelled faintly of lemon oil and her favorite lilac perfume. The papers lay as she'd left them, neat stacks, careful order. But in the bottom drawer, stiff from years of sticking, my hand brushed against a folder. It was pale blue, heavier than it looked, and on the front was a note in her handwriting, those neat block letters I'd recognize anywhere. If you're reading this, you need to know what's inside. I carried it to the desk, sat in her chair, and laid it flat in front of me. My fingers hesitated on the edge of the folder, my heart pounding louder than the storm rising outside. Philip thought forged deeds were the weapon that would bring me down. He had no idea what kind of bombshell his mother had left waiting for me in this drawer. I sat there, the pale blue folder staring back at me like an unopened letter from the dead. Margaret's handwriting on the sticky note was clear, deliberate. If you're reading this, you need to know what's inside. Need. Not should. Not might. Need. My thumb brushed over the words as though I could feel her voice through the ink. For 50 years, Margaret had been my compass. Even when we disagreed, even when she went quiet in her grief after we buried our youngest, I trusted her sense of direction. She had kept the family stitched together in ways I never fully understood. But this note, this folder, felt different. It wasn't the gentle reminders she'd leave me about pruning the apple tree or checking the basement for leaks. This was urgent. Heavy. Almost like she had been preparing for this moment, knowing I'd be sitting here, years later, with no one left to lean on but her memory. What could it be? At first, my mind went practical, financial statements, maybe. A hidden account she never mentioned, worried I'd think less of her for putting something aside. That would be like her, secretive in small ways, protective to a fault. But then the darker possibilities crept in. Debts? I had worked my whole life balancing books for strangers, could it be that my own wife had hidden something from me? A loan? A lien on the property? Or worse, something personal. A letter from a man I'd never heard of, maybe. Proof of a betrayal I never suspected. My stomach knotted at the thought. Margaret had been the steady flame of my life, the one constant through years of long hours and missed dinners. Could it all have been a performance? The rain tapped harder against the window, the storm building outside like an echo of the storm in my chest. I looked again at the note. If you're reading this, you need to know. It wasn't phrased like a confession. It was phrased like a warning. My hands trembled, old fingers clumsy against the worn paper tab. The folder gave way with a soft sigh, and the edges of documents whispered against one another like they were eager to speak after years in silence. Inside, the first page was a hospital record. The date made me freeze, 1969. The year I had been overseas, riding destroyers through black Pacific waters, Margaret sending me letters about the children, the garden, the weather back home. But this wasn't about weather. Or the children I knew. There was a name on the page. A newborn. A boy. My breath caught. My eyes scanned lower. Mother's name, Margaret Whittaker, my Margaret. Father's name, Clarence Whittaker, except it wasn't my handwriting. Someone had signed for me. I leaned back in the chair, the leather groaning under my weight. The papers blurred for a moment as my vision swam. A child. A son. One I had never been told about. And my name, my signature, falsified. Even here. My throat went dry. A son. The word clanged in my skull like a church bell, louder each time it echoed. A son I never knew. I gripped the arms of Margaret's chair until the wood dug into my palms. My mind spun backward through the years, searching for cracks in the life I thought I knew. How? When? 1969, that was the year the Navy kept me hopping from port to port, away more than home. Margaret wrote me long letters, her neat handwriting stretching across onion-skin paper, full of small stories, how Ellen had won a spelling bee, how Philip had fallen from his bike but gotten right back up, how the roses refused to bloom that spring. Nothing about pregnancy. Nothing about hospitals. Nothing about another child. My stomach clenched. Could she have hidden a pregnancy that entire time? Did the neighbors know? Did her sister? I flipped the page, my fingers unsteady, each turn of paper like peeling back skin. Next came adoption records, stamped in black ink. The boy, my boy, apparently, had been given up within weeks. The father's name listed as Clarence Whittaker, though the signature was a neat, deliberate forgery. Not mine. I stared at the page so long the words blurred, but the questions didn't stop. Why would she do this? Out of shame? Fear? Because she thought I'd never forgive her? Or, God help me, was the child even mine? The thought lodged in my chest like shrapnel. Margaret had been my world, my anchor through every storm. Was she faithful? Or had there been someone else, a shadow in the spaces between my deployments, a man who had left his mark on her in the form of a child? I pressed my hand against my temple, but the questions poured in anyway. Did she love him? Did she ever look at me and see his face in her memory? The next document was a letter, tucked between the official forms. The envelope was worn, never mailed, the handwriting undeniably hers. My hands shook as I slid it free. It was addressed, to Clarence, if you ever find this. My breath hitched. I hesitated, staring at those words, the paper trembling in my fingers. Part of me wanted to shove it back in the folder, seal the drawer, and never open it again. Pretend I hadn't seen the boy's name. Pretend the forgeries, the adoption, the deception, all of it, wasn't real. But the other part of me, the part that had lived and breathed truth in numbers and signatures for 35 years, needed to know. Needed to open the wound all the way. So I unfolded the letter. Margaret's voice seemed to rise from the paper as my eyes began to move across her words. The paper crackled as I unfolded it, the faint scent of lilac clinging to the fibers like her ghost had sealed it there. My eyes caught the first lines, her familiar hand steady and deliberate. Clarence, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't carry the secret any longer, even after death. There is a boy, born in 1969, whose life began in our house but could not stay in it. I wanted to tell you so many times, but every moment I tried, I saw how it would break you. I stopped. The words blurred. My chest rose and fell too fast, as though the air had thinned around me. A boy. Born in our house. Could not stay. The images rushed in before I could stop them, Margaret alone in that bedroom, our bedroom, while I was thousands of miles away, rocking a newborn against her chest. Did Ellen and Philip know? Did they hear a baby's cry, hushed quickly, explained away as something else? Or had she hidden it even from them? And why could he not stay? Was it poverty? Shame? Another man's child? The letter trembled in my hands as sweat gathered at the back of my neck. I thought of her steady gaze across the dinner table, of the quiet smile she'd wear when folding laundry, of the way she'd squeeze my hand at church. Was that same hand the one that signed adoption papers with my forged name? I set the letter down for a moment, staring at the desk as though the wood itself might answer. The storm outside rattled the windows, and for the first time since Margaret's death, I felt her absence like a physical blow. She had carried this secret alone. A secret that now pulsed in my hands, heavy as lead. After several long minutes, I forced myself to keep reading. My thumb pressed hard against the edge of the page as if bracing for impact. Please believe me when I say it was not done out of betrayal. It was done out of fear. Fear that the truth of his birth would destroy our family, fear that you would not be able to forgive what I had done to survive while you were away. But the boy is yours, Clarence. He always was. I steadied the page, my eyes running on though my heart begged to stop. Margaret's words stretched further, each sentence cutting deeper than the last. I kept him only for a short while. He had your eyes, Clarence, wide, searching, as if he already knew he belonged to a man who wasn't there to hold him. I wanted to keep him, but I had no way to explain his presence when you returned. The neighbors already whispered. My own sister threatened to tell you if I didn't make it right. I was terrified. So I signed the adoption papers with your name. Forged it, because I knew the law would not let me place him without your consent. I told myself it was the only way to save what we had. My stomach lurched. I gripped the paper tighter, my knuckles white, as though I could throttle the truth out of it. She had done it with my name, used the same signature I had guarded like a weapon for decades, against me. The letter went on. He was taken by a family in Ohio. A quiet couple, no children of their own. I checked once, years later, through a friend at the courthouse. They raised him well. He went to school. He had a stable home. I wanted to reach out, but I couldn't. By then, Ellen and Philip were growing, and our life was so carefully balanced. To tell you then would have shattered it. So I carried the silence instead. Every year on his birthday, I baked a cake you thought was for a neighbor, or a church potluck. It was for him. For the son who should have been ours. My chest tightened until I thought the old heart inside me might split. All those cakes. All those excuses. And I had never questioned it. The final lines blurred as tears I didn't know I still had welled up, but I forced myself to read them. I don't ask for forgiveness, Clarence. Only that you understand I loved you enough to carry this weight alone. If he comes searching one day, and he might, I beg you, do not turn him away. His name is David. He deserves to know who his father truly is. David. I read the name again, and again, until it no longer looked like a name but a wound, fresh and open. My wife had lived beside me half a century with this secret pressed into her chest like a stone. My children circled like vultures outside my door, forging my name to steal what they thought was theirs. And in some town in Ohio, there was a man, my blood, my son, who had no idea who I was. The storm outside cracked thunder across the roof, but the louder storm was inside me. David. The name seemed to pulse from the page, hammering at my ribs with every beat of my tired heart. I leaned back in Margaret's chair, the leather creaking, and pressed both palms over my face. The letter slid from my lap and landed on the desk with a dull thud, as if even it was exhausted by the weight of its truth. My mind reeled. For 50 years, I had thought I knew every chapter of my life. The story of Clarence Whitaker, son of a machinist, Navy man, bank auditor, husband, father. Predictable. Ordinary. Stable. I had built a legacy of routine and honesty, as precise as the balance sheets I once kept. And yet, right here in my hands, was proof that my life had run a parallel story all along. A son I had never met. A family decision made in secret. A forged signature, my name, my very identity, used without my knowing. And the bitter irony was impossible to miss. Philip and Sharon thought they were the first to forge my hand for their own gain. But Margaret had done it decades earlier, to erase a life before it ever reached mine. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that startled even me. My God, I whispered into the quiet room, all these years, and I was the last to know my own story. The storm rattled the windows harder, as though the house itself wanted me to move, to decide, to act. But how? What would I do now? My children were circling closer every day, sharpening their knives with words like assisted living and incompetence. I had been bracing myself for their betrayal, steeling my mind to fight them in court, to protect my estate, my dignity. And now there was David. Did I owe him something? A life stolen from me wasn't his fault. He deserved answers. But how could I begin that search while my own children were busy plotting my demise? I looked down at Margaret's handwriting again. The plea in her final line, "Do not turn him away," was louder than any storm. I felt torn in two. Part of me wanted to march straight to Philip's house, slam the folder on his table, and tell him I'd leave every penny of my estate to the son they never knew existed. Let him choke on it. But another part of me hesitated. Was I ready to tear open another family rift, one Margaret had spent her life trying to hide? Was it even fair to David, who might have no idea what storm was waiting if I dragged him into this? My chest heaved. Every option felt like betrayal, of Margaret, of my children, of myself. And yet one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same. I closed the folder gently, almost tenderly, and set it back on the desk. My hand lingered on its cover, as though I could press the truth back inside, bury it again where it had slept for decades. But the truth was awake now. And so was I. I did not sleep that night. The folder sat on the desk in Margaret's study, its edges catching the moonlight like it was daring me to open it again. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing the rain taper into silence, my mind split in two. On one side, Philip. My eldest. The boy I once carried on my shoulders at the county fair, now the man who would forge his father's name and threaten court to take what wasn't his. He had made himself the enemy, and I would need to strike back in a way he would never see coming. On the other side, David. A son I had never met, a name pressed into my chest like a hot brand. Margaret's plea echoed in my ears, "Do not turn him away." But how could I turn toward him yet, with my other children circling me like wolves? By dawn, I knew I could not choose one battle over the other. I had to fight them both. The morning brought Philip's voice on the phone, sharp as a knife. "Dad, I've spoken with an attorney. If you don't sign voluntarily, we'll pursue guardianship. We have enough to show you're not capable of handling affairs." Capable? I let the word hang, then chuckled low. "Philip, you don't even know the half of what I'm capable of." He paused, the silence stretching. Then, colder, "You'll regret dragging this out." I ended the call without another word. Let him think he'd rattled me. Because while Philip was busy lawyering threats, I was already assembling my own weapons. I pulled out my old fireproof box, where every deed, every title, every receipt still rested exactly where I'd hidden them decades ago. Originals. Untouched. With my real signature. Proof that his drafts were nothing but forgery. I smiled faintly for the first time in days. If he wanted a courtroom war, I'd bury him in evidence. But when the anger ebbed, the folder called me back. I sat once more in Margaret's chair, running my finger over David's name. He would be a grown man by now, what, 55? Maybe with children of his own. My grandchildren, living their lives without ever knowing the old man who shared their blood. A strange thought struck me, perhaps my estate did not belong to Philip and Ellen at all. Perhaps the true legacy should pass to the son who had been erased, not the children who wanted me erased. The idea warmed me like whiskey in the gut. It was revenge and redemption all at once. Philip thought the future was his. But I could feel Margaret's words nudging me, urging me, "Do not turn him away." And so the balance became clear. I would deal with Philip, yes, show him that his father was not yet conquered. But at the same time, I would begin the search for David. Quietly, carefully. Because maybe the best way to destroy the vultures was not with fire or courtrooms, but by giving everything to the son they never knew existed. The morning after Philip's threat, I knew what I had to do. For most of my career, my job wasn't just numbers, it was people. Knowing who to call when a signature looked off, which county clerk filed faster if you sent a box of donuts, which courthouse secretary might quietly slip you a copy if you asked the right way. Those strings might be old, but they hadn't all snapped. I started with my Rolodex. Yes, I still kept one, names and numbers scratched in my handwriting, inked in decades when people picked up landlines instead of emails. My children mocked it, called it Dad's dinosaur. But dinosaurs, I thought, ruled the world once. It took 6 tries before someone answered. Clarence. My God, you're still alive. The voice was gravelly but familiar, Pete Dawson, a county records clerk I used to trade Christmas cigars with back in the 80s. Alive and working, I said. Pete, I need a favor. Quiet favor. Looking for adoption records from 1969. Ohio. He chuckled. You don't start small, do you? That's sealed material. You know that. I also know how sloppy the paperwork was back then. Half those files never made it to microfiche. They're probably sitting in some basement box with dust thicker than my hair. Pete was quiet a long moment. Name: David. Born 1969. Mother: Margaret Whittaker. I hesitated on the father, then forced it out. Father: me. At least on paper. Another pause. I pictured him leaning back in that squeaky chair of his, chewing a pencil like he always did. You didn't hear this from me, he muttered finally. But there's an old juvenile court annex in Columbus. The clerks there never threw anything out. I'll see if I can get a file pulled. My hand trembled as I set the phone down. For the first time since Margaret's funeral, I felt something close to hope. But I didn't stop there. I went through every tool at my disposal. Old Navy contacts. I still had the address book from our reunion 20 years ago. One of those men worked in genealogy, helping families trace lost relatives of veterans. I wrote him a letter by hand, outlining only the bare facts. Looking for a man named David. Born 1969. Adopted from Ohio. Biological father, Navy. And then I dug into my own craft. I spread the papers across Margaret's desk, checking every detail: dates, notarizations, the names of the adoption agency, the faint embossed seal in the corner. I'd spent decades catching fraud through those details. Now I was trying to catch the truth. Piece by piece, a picture began to form. A couple named Henderson. Small town address. No children at the time. Likely the ones who had raised David. I leaned back, heart pounding. For the first time, his life felt real. Not just a name on a page. My pen hovered over a notepad. Should I write him? Call him? Was he even alive? Would he slam the door in my face, thinking me some senile old man chasing ghosts? I glanced at Margaret's letter again. Do not turn him away. All right, Margaret, I whispered into the empty room. But how do I find the courage to turn toward him? The answer didn't come. Not yet. But the path was clearing in front of me, paper by paper, detail by detail. 2 weeks of digging, and the pieces finally began to align. Pete called me back first. His voice was low, cautious, like a man standing with one foot in two worlds. Clarence, I shouldn't be telling you this, but I found the file. Henderson family, small town outside Columbus. Adoption finalized late summer of '69. They moved 3 years later, to Dayton. My pulse quickened. Dayton. I wrote the word in thick block letters on the pad in front of me. I spent the next 3 nights combing online records. Even at 77, I knew how to use a search engine, though I had to adjust my glasses every few minutes, squinting at the glow of the monitor. Henderson was a common name, too common. But then I noticed a detail Pete had mentioned offhand, the husband's first name, Walter. Walter and Joan Henderson. That narrowed things. With that, the trail sharpened. Newspaper clippings from the '70s, Walter had opened an auto shop in Dayton. Business ads, addresses, eventually a family obituary from the early '90s. Walter, deceased. Joan, survived by their beloved son David Henderson. David. The obituary listed his age, 23 at the time. Which meant he'd be 55 now. Right where Margaret's letter had placed him in my mind. I searched further. A business registry. A LinkedIn profile. David Henderson, CPA, Dayton. A photograph popped up, grainy, but enough. A man with graying hair, square jaw, and eyes so familiar I felt a jolt in my chest. My eyes. For minutes, I sat frozen, staring at the screen. My son. A stranger. Living less than 4 hours away. The question gnawed at me: how does one approach a man with 55 years of silence between you? A man raised by others, with a last name that wasn't mine. A man who might slam the door, or worse, pretend to smile while he told me never to contact him again. I thought of my own children, Philip, Ellen, their greed and their threats. The way they looked at me now like an obstacle, not a father. What if David was different? What if, by some miracle, Margaret's plea was right, that he deserved to know me, and I deserved to know him? I scribbled on the pad. Option 1, write a letter. Honest. Risk him ignoring it. Option 2, call. Too sudden, too invasive. Option 3, visit in person. Knock on his door like some ghost of the past. My hand trembled as I wrote a fourth line, darker, but truer. Option 4, do nothing. I sat there staring at those 4 choices. The folder lay open beside me, Margaret's letter still on top, her words steady as stone: do not turn him away. No, Margaret, I whispered, voice cracking. But what if he turns me away? The storm had passed, but inside me the storm raged on. Still, for the first time in months, I felt the faint spark of purpose. My children might strip me down to nothing, but before they did, I would find David. And if he was willing, I'd give him everything, not just the estate they were clawing for, but the truth of who he was. I folded the notepad closed. Tomorrow, I told myself, I'd decide how to take the first step. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a fountain pen Margaret had given me for our 25th anniversary. The ink flowed smoothly, but the words did not. Dear David, I wrote at the top. Then I stared at the page for 15 minutes. How do you explain to a man that you are the father he never knew? That his mother was not your wife, but your wife still raised him in silence for half a century? I tried again. My name is Clarence Whitaker. You don't know me, but... No. Too abrupt. It sounded like the start of a scam letter. I crumpled the page and started again. I am writing to tell you something about your birth. It's something your adoptive parents might never have told you, but my late wife left me the truth in a letter. I stopped mid-sentence. My hand trembled, the letters smearing. It sounded clinical, detached, like a banker explaining a loan. I closed my eyes and saw his face again from that grainy photograph, graying hair, my eyes staring back at me. No letter could carry what I needed him to see, the regret, the years, the truth. He would read it and toss it aside, assuming I was just another lonely old man reaching for attention. I set the pen down. Some things cannot be written. They must be said face to face. The decision landed heavy, but firm. My children were sharpening knives behind my back, Margaret's voice pressed on my conscience, and David's existence burned like a secret too hot to keep hidden. I went to the garage, slid behind the wheel of the Buick, and turned the key. The engine roared to life, louder than I remembered, but steady. I backed out of the driveway, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror, Margaret's study window glinting in the sunlight as if watching me go. The notepad with my failed letter sat on the passenger seat. Across the top, in shaky handwriting, one word remained legible: David. 4 hours to Dayton. For hours to a man who didn't know I existed. As the highway opened up before me, I gripped the wheel tighter and whispered, "You wanted me not to turn him away, Margaret. Well, I'm going to him." The interstate hummed beneath the Buick's tires, the yellow lines flickering past like a metronome. Dayton was still hours ahead, but every mile felt like a step towards something I could never undo. I had just begun to settle into the rhythm of the drive when my phone buzzed on the seat beside me. Once. Twice. Then again. By the fourth time, I snatched it up at a red light. 7 missed calls. 12 new messages. All from Philip. I swiped one open. "Dad, ignoring me isn't going to help. You're making this worse for yourself." The next came seconds later. "Our lawyer says if you keep resisting, we can push for emergency guardianship. You won't have control over your accounts by next month." Another, nastier. "You're not thinking clearly. Everyone can see it. Just sign before you embarrass yourself." My grip tightened around the phone until my knuckles ached. Buzz. Another message. "If you don't pick up, I'm driving over to the house. Don't forget the law is on my side here." I laughed bitterly at the empty road ahead. "You think the law's on your side, boy? You've never met the law in my hands." The buzzing didn't stop. Every few miles, another call. Another message. Threats disguised as concern. Condescension sharpened into promises of humiliation. I turned the phone off and tossed it into the glove box. Let him rage into silence. Let him choke on his own certainty. But the damage was done. The words burrowed into my head like worms: guardianship, incompetent, no control. If Philip made good on those threats, I could lose everything before I even reached David. The estate, the accounts, even the Buick I was driving, it could all be frozen under some judge's order, signed while my son smirked in the back of the courtroom. And that thought brought me to a cold realization: time wasn't just short. It was a noose tightening around my neck. This trip wasn't only about meeting David anymore. It was about securing him. Claiming him before Philip could erase me on paper the way Margaret had erased him 55 years ago. I pressed harder on the gas, the Buick shuddering as the speedometer climbed. The road stretched out like a fuse, and I was running it faster than ever. The phone buzzed again in the glove box, rattling against the flashlight I kept in there. I gritted my teeth, but something in me snapped. Enough running silent. At the next rest stop, I pulled over, yanked open the glove box, and answered before the buzzing could stop. "What do you want, Philip?" My voice was steady, cold. "Finally." His tone was sharp, triumphant, like a man who had just cornered his prey. "Dad, this has gone far enough. You're driving around, making rash decisions, ignoring the family. Do you want to force me into court? You mean force me out of my own life?" I asked. "You're not thinking clearly," he shot back. "Sharon said you accused her of forgery. Do you realize how paranoid that sounds? The judge will eat it up. They'll say you're delusional. That you're not fit to manage anything." I let out a dry laugh. "Paranoid, is it? Philip, I kept the originals. Every deed. Every title. Every receipt with my hand on it. A judge will see forgery all right, but it won't be mine." His silence told me I'd hit the mark. Then his voice returned, lower, venomous. "You dragged your own family through court. You'd ruin us just to cling to control. You ruined yourself the moment you forged my name, I said, gripping the wheel tighter. And I don't cling, Philip. I fight. You've just forgotten who taught you that word. He exhaled hard. Dad, listen to me. If you keep this up, you'll end up alone. No one will be left for you when it's over. I glanced at the notepad on the passenger seat. One word stared back at me in my shaky handwriting, David. Don't worry about me being alone, I said softly. You'd be surprised who's still out there. Before he could answer, I hung up. I merged back onto the highway, leaving the rest stop lights behind. The Buick hummed steady beneath me, every mile bringing me closer. Hours later, the city sign for Dayton rose out of the dusk. My hands were damp on the wheel, my chest tight with anticipation. I turned down a tree-lined street, older houses set back on neat lawns. The address I had scribbled from the records came up on the mailbox. I pulled over and cut the engine. The silence was deafening. My reflection in the car window looked older than I'd ever seen it, lined, pale, but alive. The house itself was modest. White siding, trimmed hedges, a porch light already glowing against the evening. Ordinary. The kind of place you drive past without a second thought. And yet, behind that door was a man with my blood in his veins. For a long moment, I sat frozen, staring at it. My heart thudded like a hammer. Finally, I forced the door open. Gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked up the short path, the cool evening air burning in my lungs. I raised my hand to knock. 55 years too late. And then the door opened before I could touch it. A man stood there, graying hair, square jaw, and those eyes. My eyes. He frowned slightly. Can I help you? My mouth went dry. Words I had rehearsed in silence for hours tangled in my throat. But one name broke through. David. David's hand tightened on the doorknob. His brows furrowed, suspicion sharpening his face. Do I know you? My throat was dry. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. No. Not yet. He stepped onto the porch, folding his arms across his chest like a shield. He wasn't hostile, not yet, but there was a guardedness, the kind a man wears when he's had enough salesmen, petitioners, and uninvited strangers knock on his door. Then how do you know my name? I felt my pulse thundering in my temples. The speech I had practiced, half letter, half confession, scrambled under the weight of his eyes, my own eyes staring back at me. Because I've known it for 55 years. I should have come sooner. But I didn't even know you existed until a few weeks ago. His jaw tightened. What is this? Who sent you? No one sent me, I said quickly, shaking my head. My wife, Margaret, she left me something before she died. A letter. A truth she'd carried alone. And that truth is you. He froze. The porch light cast his features in a pale glow, highlighting every twitch, every flicker of disbelief. What are you saying? His voice was low, sharp. I'm saying, my chest heaved as the words pushed themselves out. That I'm your father. The silence that followed was suffocating. The neighbor's dog barked in the distance. A car passed at the end of the street. But here, on this small patch of porch, time seemed to hold its breath. David's mouth opened, closed. He laughed once, a single, disbelieving sound, and shook his head. This is insane. My parents were Walter and Joan Henderson. They raised me. They were good people. I don't doubt that, I said softly. I thank God they were. But Margaret, my wife, she gave you up. Signed my name without me knowing. And she begged me, in her last words to me, to never turn you away if I found you. His eyes searched mine then, cautious but lingering, as though he were looking for cracks in the story. I let him look. I had nothing left but the truth. After a long pause, he exhaled sharply and stepped back. Come inside. Whatever this is, it shouldn't be talked about on a porch. I nodded, my knees weak with relief, and followed him into the warmth of the house. The interior was simple, framed photos on the mantel, a faint smell of coffee in the air. A home that had been lived in with steadiness. We sat across from each other in the living room. David leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, staring at me as though I might vanish. So, if this is true, why now? Why 55 years later? I hesitated, then pulled Margaret's letter from my coat pocket. The folds were worn from the drive, but her words were still clear. I slid it across the table. Because I only just learned myself. And I couldn't live another day without facing you. He picked up the letter slowly, his fingers brushing the paper. He didn't open it right away, just held it, eyes flicking from the page to me. And in that moment, something softened in his face. Not belief, not yet. But curiosity. The first crack in the wall. You've got my eyes, he said quietly, almost to himself. I felt my chest tighten. And you've got my stubborn chin. Trust me, I've been cursed with it all my life. For the first time, he smiled, brief, unsure, but real. The tension didn't vanish, but it thinned, replaced by something fragile, tentative. A bridge beginning to form. David set Margaret's letter down carefully, as though it might break if he handled it wrong. His hands were steady, but his eyes stayed locked on me, searching. Tell me, he said at last, his voice low, almost cautious. Why would she hide me? Why wouldn't you know? The question cut straight through me. Not with anger, but with the quiet weight of someone who has lived his whole life with pieces missing and now dares to ask for the rest. I leaned back in the chair, my hands clasped to keep them from trembling. My thoughts scattered like papers in the wind. Where could I even begin? She was alone, I said slowly, hearing my own voice as though it belonged to someone else. It was 1969. I was half a world away on the Pacific, Navy orders keeping me moving from one port to the next. Letters were our only thread. She never told me she was pregnant. Never let on. My throat tightened. Memories I hadn't touched in decades came flooding back, the cramped ship quarters, Margaret's letters in thin envelopes that smelled faintly of her perfume, me reading them under the weak glow of a bunk light. All those words about the children at home, the weather, her loneliness, and never once a hint of this. She must have been terrified, I whispered. Her sister, our neighbors, they would have judged her. She told me later she was afraid I'd never forgive her. So she made the choice herself. Forged my name on the adoption. Buried the truth. David's eyes didn't waver. He listened like a man who had learned patience from years of waiting without knowing what he was waiting for. And you? He asked gently. Did you ever suspect? That question hurt worst of all. I thought back, Margaret baking cakes she claimed were for neighbors. The way she sometimes slipped away on certain days of the year, saying she had errands. Her sudden silences when the children were small, when she thought I wasn't looking. I should have, I admitted, my voice breaking. I should have seen it. But I didn't. I trusted her completely. And by the time I learned, it was 2 weeks ago. In a folder she left behind. I rubbed my face with both hands, the weight of 77 years pressing on me all at once. 55 years, David. 55 years, and I never knew you were out there. I wasted a lifetime I can't get back. That's my sin. The silence stretched, heavy, but not hostile. I dared to look at him again. His face had softened, not entirely, but enough. You couldn't have known, he said finally, his voice quieter. She made that choice. You didn't. I swallowed hard. Part of me wanted to argue, to claim guilt anyway, because guilt was safer than absolution. But another part of me, a tired, aching part, clung to his words like a lifeline. Trust. Fragile, tentative trust. I could feel it forming between us like ice across a winter pond. Thin, delicate, but real. In my mind, I saw Philip's face, smug and calculating, already plotting how to carve up my estate. And here was David, steady, listening, not demanding a thing. Just wanting the truth. The contrast hollowed me out and filled me up all at once. For the first time since Margaret's funeral, I thought, maybe I wasn't entirely alone anymore. David leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving me. The letter still rested between us on the table, an invisible wall and a fragile bridge all at once. What about now? He asked softly. Your life. Your family. You came all this way to find me, why? I hesitated. The truth pressed at the back of my teeth, hot and bitter. I wanted to tell him everything, that my own son was sharpening knives in courtrooms, that my daughter had let her husband whisper poison about me, that they were circling my estate like crows. But looking at David, the cautious hope in his eyes, the disbelief still melting into something else, I couldn't. Not yet. I couldn't taint this fragile new thread between us with the rot of Philip's greed. So I offered him the safest piece of truth I could. I came because I couldn't let another day pass without seeing you. After Margaret's letter. I knew I had to try. That's all. He studied me for a long moment, his fingers tapping lightly against his knee. I could see he wasn't satisfied, but he let it rest. And then my phone, forgotten in my coat pocket, began to buzz. David frowned. You going to get that? I sighed, pulling it free. The screen lit up, Philip. Again. The buzzing stopped. Then a text flashed across the screen, big and ugly. Dad, you've forced my hand. Lawyers filing guardianship petition tomorrow. Say goodbye to your house. My chest burned. Before I could shove the phone back, David's eyes caught the message. He leaned forward, sharp. Who's that? Nothing, I muttered, too quick, too defensive. But the phone buzzed again, another message rolling in like a thunderclap. You're not competent anymore. Everyone agrees. Don't fight it. David's jaw tightened. He reached out, steady but firm, and took the phone from my hand before I could stop him. His eyes scanned the messages, his lips pressed thin. When he looked back at me, there was no softness now, only fire. Your son is trying to strip you bare. I tried to wave it off, ashamed. It's complicated. No, he cut me off, his voice steady but fierce. It's not. He's threatening you, trying to steal what's yours. You came here thinking you'd burden me with some secret from the past, but Clarence, you're the one who needs saving. The word saving hit me like a blow. I had driven to Dayton thinking I would offer him the truth, a piece of his identity. But here he was, staring me dead in the eye, already turning the tables. I won't let them do this to you, David said, leaning forward, conviction in every word. Not after 55 years of silence. Not after you finally came to find me. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, tears pressing at the corners of my eyes. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel like prey. For the first time, I felt like I had an ally. I sat there, staring at David across the small living room, my phone still glowing with Philip's venom. In a single evening, my world had shifted again. I had driven to Dayton with nothing but a name and a hope that Margaret's plea wouldn't collapse in my hands. I had knocked on a stranger's door and found the son I never knew existed. And now, instead of turning me away, he had leaned forward with fire in his voice, declaring he would not let Philip destroy me. It was almost too much to hold, the weight of 55 lost years, the sting of betrayal from the children I had raised, the fragile but growing thread of trust between me and David. Inside, I felt a strange blend of grief and strength. Grief for the life I missed with him. Strength from the fact that, even so late, I was no longer alone in this fight. Because the fight was coming. Philip had made sure of it. Guardianship. Competency hearings. Lawyers, paperwork, lies dressed up as concern. He thought I'd walk into that courtroom a feeble old man with no defense. But Philip had no idea I was bringing David with me. And if my son wanted a war over my future, then he was about to learn that this old man still had weapons left. That night, David brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead. We sat at his kitchen table, papers spread between us, the adoption records, Margaret's letter, and my old file box of originals that I had guarded for decades. He tapped one of the forged deeds Sharon had tried to slip under my pen. These alone could bury Philip. Forgery's a felony. If he presses this in court, we counterpunch hard. I shook my head. I don't want to see my own son behind bars. David's eyes met mine, steady, calm. Then you'd better want to see him stopped. Because if you don't, he'll bury you. His words cut, but I knew they were true. For years I had been patient, forgiving, the quiet father who turned the other cheek. That Clarence had died the moment I saw my forged signature staring back at me. David leaned forward, his accountant's instincts flashing sharp. We'll build it simple. Originals versus forgeries. Your financial trail, every payment, every deposit, clean as a whistle. You may be 77, but your mind is sharper than half the men in my office. We'll show that. And if they want to argue you're incompetent, we'll remind them exactly who taught me to spot fraud, my father. My chest tightened at the word. My father. 55 years late, and yet it rang true. I nodded slowly. All right then. Let's fight. The courtroom was colder than I remembered. Polished wood, stale air, and the buzz of whispers from the gallery. Philip sat across the aisle with Sharon at his side, smug in a tailored suit I suspected he hadn't paid for himself. His lawyer, a slick man with a too-white smile, leaned in close, whispering strategies. I sat with David. My David. He wore a plain suit, no flash, but he radiated calm strength. His hand brushed the folder of evidence on the table like it was a weapon he knew how to use. The judge adjusted her glasses, scanning the docket. Guardianship petition, Whitaker family. Counsel, you may proceed. Philip's lawyer rose first, smooth as silk. Your Honor, this case is simple. Mr. Whitaker, though respected in his career, is now 77 years old. He's made erratic decisions, alienated his family, and cannot responsibly manage his estate. His children seek guardianship out of concern, not greed. I almost laughed at that last word. Then it was David's turn. He stood slowly, his voice clear and steady. Your Honor, my name is David Henderson. I am here on behalf of Clarence Whitaker, my father. I only recently learned the truth of our relationship, but tonight isn't about family history. It's about facts. And the facts are these, Mr. Whitaker is not incompetent. He is the victim of attempted fraud, by his own son. The room stirred. Philip shifted in his seat, color rising in his cheeks. David laid the originals on the judge's bench, each one crisp, signed, authenticated. Then he placed the forged deeds beside them, the ink still smelling fresh. Compare the signatures. Any auditor would. My father was one for 35 years. The judge examined them, her brow furrowing deeper with each page. Philip's lawyer sputtered. Your Honor, these accusations. But the judge raised a hand. The documents speak loudly, Counselor. Very loudly. Philip's mask cracked then. He leaned toward Sharon, whispering harshly, his face pale. I watched him squirm, the same boy who once begged me for quarters at the county fair, now exposed in front of the law he thought he controlled. And for the first time in a long time, I felt steady. I wasn't the cornered old man anymore. I was Clarence Whitaker. Father. Fighter. And I wasn't fighting alone. The courtroom had gone silent but for the rustle of papers and the faint squeak of the judge's chair as she leaned forward. She adjusted her glasses again, studying the signatures under the light as though weighing more than ink. Finally, she looked up. Her voice was firm, resonant. Mr. Whitaker, after reviewing these documents, I find no evidence of incompetence on your part. On the contrary, I see clear, documented proof of deliberate forgery presented to this court. Philip's lawyer shifted uneasily. Your Honor, my client. Silence, counsel. The judge's tone cut like a blade. Forgery of legal deeds is a felony offense. And when it comes from one's own family, that is not guardianship. That is exploitation. The gavel cracked once against the wood. The petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate investigation into these forged deeds. The words landed like thunder. For a second, Philip just sat there, frozen, his mouth half open, color draining from his face. Then the bailiff stepped forward. Sir, please stand. No, Philip muttered, shaking his head, eyes darting around like a trapped animal. This isn't, Dad, tell them. Tell them I was just. But the bailiff's hand was already on his shoulder. With one swift motion, cold metal clicked shut around his wrists. The sound echoed across the courtroom. Gasps rose from the gallery. Sharon's face went white, her eyes wide, her hands clutching her purse as though it could anchor her to a world collapsing. I sat still, my heart pounding but my face steady. For years, I had been the quiet man who gave too much, forgave too easily. Watching my son in handcuffs, my own flesh and blood, was agony. But it was agony wrapped in justice, the kind that cut deep because it was true. The judge's gavel struck again. This court is adjourned. As people filed out, whispers swirling like leaves, I remained in my seat. My hands gripped the edges of the bench, not from weakness, but to hold the weight of the moment steady inside me. Beside me, David placed a hand on my arm. Not forceful. Not claiming. Just steady. You're not alone anymore. I turned my head and looked at him. My son. The son Margaret had hidden, the son I had found too late, yet right on time. Outside, the bailiff guided Philip away, his face twisted in fury and shame. His fate now belonged to the courts. Prison, probation, disgrace, I didn't know. And for the first time, I didn't need to know. Because whatever came of him, I still had my name. My life. And, perhaps, a chance at a new bond with the son who had chosen to stand beside me. The future was uncertain. But it was mine again. The days after the hearing passed in a strange kind of peace. For the first time in months, no papers arrived by courier, no late-night threats buzzed my phone. The house was still mine. My name was clean. And Philip, well, the system would decide his fate. The last I saw of him was the look on his face as the bailiff led him away, anger, fear, betrayal all tangled into something unrecognizable. That memory should have weighed me down, but instead it felt like the closing of a door I'd been afraid to shut for too long. The following weekend, I drove to Dayton again. Not out of desperation this time, but invitation. David met me at the door before I even knocked. No suspicion in his eyes now, no guarded arms crossed over his chest. Just a man standing taller, with the faintest smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Dad," he said softly. The word landed gentle, but it still shook me to my core. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and roast chicken. We sat at his kitchen table again, but this time there were no piles of documents, no letters trembling between us. Just 2 mugs of steaming coffee and the sound of rain beginning to patter against the windows. He told me about his life, how Walter and Joan raised him with kindness, how he had married young, divorced, built a career in numbers not unlike mine. He spoke of regrets, too, the quiet kind, the ones you only share when you feel safe. And I told him about Margaret, about Ellen, about the years of work that shaped me. I even told him about Philip, not with bitterness, but with the quiet acceptance of a man who finally sees things clearly. Hours passed like minutes. Somewhere in the middle of it, David reached across the table, resting his hand over mine. Not tentative this time, not cautious. Solid. Present. 55 years late, I said, my voice rough, but I'm glad I finally found you. He squeezed my hand, his eyes steady. Better late than never. That night, as I drove back home through the rain-slick roads, I didn't feel the old emptiness anymore. The battles were behind me. Ahead was something different, not perfect, not whole, but real. And in my heart, for the first time since Margaret's funeral, I felt a quiet warmth. Not just the warmth of survival, but the warmth of reunion. The warmth of a father and a son beginning again.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.